Before I send this game crashing into the ground, I've got to give it some credit. It starts out really strong. That opening sequence with the camera tilting down from the stars to show the landscape of Baraka littered with star destroyers is excellent. And as the Mongolian metal song comes in, it becomes obvious what this game's strongest leg is, delivering gorgeous visuals and clean audio. And Fallen Order keeps delivering these beautiful visuals through its expansive worlds that are supported by sound effects and music. From the sounds of blasters to Cal's footsteps on glass, to the exciting battle theme, which emphasizes the game's combat, which in itself is pretty good. This is due to the variety of tools you have to overcome the enemies. You can push them over the edge, dodge their attacks and make an opening, force choke them to death and then stab them through the chest. There's something like 30 different takedowns. The main cast of characters is also pretty good. The Fallen Captain is a competent comedy relief, BD1 is surprisingly expressive for a robot, and Cal is interesting enough to be invested in because he's humble and honest but has clear flaws as he blames himself for mistakes that aren't even his own. And Cal's journey through these visually excellent worlds, regaining his lost abilities to overcome his past on paper is really good, but this is where the game starts to fall flat. There are a variety of stupid mistakes in this game that pull it down. Most of the planets are pretty linear. Usually you have a choice between the main path and a side challenge which will give you a stim, or a collectible that you'll never use. These linear levels are also a huge pain in the ass to backtrack in, and despite the game being linear, it has without doubt the worst 3D map ever designed in any video game. You are going to have to backtrack because some of the challenges require you to progress 2 hours further into the story to get a force ability necessary to complete that challenge. The skills you can acquire through the skill tree can either be worthless or mildly useful. The combat also continues this trend of being hit or miss. Sometimes the parry times are precise, other times they don't match up with the animation at all. Sometimes the enemy AI has more than 2 brain cells, other times they just walk into walls, put away their weapons, and just stare you in the face and do nothing. Now, some of you might point out that this game has improved on lightsaber combat and Jedi combat in every single way from previous Star Wars games, and that is true. But you have to realize, I played this after finishing Sekiro, a game which has beautiful visuals and audio, but doesn't sacrifice on the gameplay elements, and was released more than half a year earlier. Sekiro's combat is probably the best 1v1 combat I've ever experienced in any video game. The core elements of both Fallen Order's and Sekiro's combat systems are actually pretty similar. Enemies have both a health and posture bar, emphasizing a higher focus on parries rather than dodges, with minor tools to help supplement the combat, such as combat arts, force powers, or prosthetics. All of these take from a shared currency. In Fallen Order, it is the Force Meter, in Sekiro, it is the Spirit Emblems. But Fallen Order's combat, in comparison, feels like a dumbed down, slower version of Sekiro's. Fallen Order's enemies have less variety and move in a really clunky way in comparison to Sekiro's dance-like attacks, some of which are literally dances. The indicator for attacks is clearer in Sekiro for both general and perilous attacks. Sekiro also gives more ways of dealing with these attacks than Fallen Order, with the Mikiri counter and the Goomba Stomp. But hold on, you might say. Sekiro has a much stronger focus on its combat than Fallen Order, so it should be a given that Fallen Order's combat and enemy variety isn't as polished as Sekiro's. So let's compare other parts of each game. Both games have platforming, and Fallen Order actually does a pretty good job weaving its puzzles and force powers into it, which is something Sekiro doesn't do at all. but you see, Sekiro has a grapple hook. Both games are visually impressive, and Fallen Order is definitely graphically more impressive, but the bugginess, bad enemy AI, enemy dialogue,
I've got this. Come back here and fight.
Linear level design, and platforming, which doesn't always make sense in the context of the world, break the game's immersion. Besides the odd bug in Sekiro and some of the environments not responding to character actions, the immersion is never broken. The world, combat, audio, and dialogue of Sekiro drew me into its story and didn't let go, until I got flung off a cliff. Remember when this video was a review of Fallen Order? That's because I forgot what my purpose was. Fallen Order does a lot of things, but it forgets to focus in on the elements that complement its story. Fallen Order has 2 separate stories of differing qualities sticky taped together. One of them is supported by the game's mechanics, whilst the other is just used as a driving force to move the character from one place to the next. The first one is focused around Cal surviving the attacks from the Inquisitors and repairing his connection to the Force by making peace with his past and forgiving himself. This is supported by the game's mechanics, as Cal reacquires his past Force abilities, which he learned off his old master, whom he believes he failed. You know, these are the premises for a good fucking story, if you executed them with proper dialogue and animation. The second story is about finding some dumbass cube before the Empire, so you can rebuild the Jedi Order, which ultimately doesn't even matter, because the game's story can't have any lasting impacts on the Star Wars universe. Despite this being the supposed major plot of the story, with the first story I outlined just being a subplot that connects to this, it kinda fucking sucks, because it only acts as Cal's driving force to go to different planets, and doesn't have any real effect on the world or its characters. Older Star Wars games, such as KOTOR, had its characters, the universe, and the person playing the game affected by its story by asking that player questions and showing them the consequences of their answers. But they were only able to ask the player these sorts of questions because they honed in on the type of game they wanted to make and used the gameplay elements to support the story that they wanted to tell. If Fallen Order had ditched the holocron and focused on Cal's story and polished its combat, level design, dialogue, and cutscenes, and overall gaming experience, this could have been a fucking masterpiece. But despite visually and mechanically advancing past old Star Wars games like KOTOR, they still end up being worse because they forget to hone in on their purpose and feed the mechanics of the game towards that purpose. Get this bullshit out of here.